Hello, I'm Ryan from The Way of the Leaf, and we welcome you to our show, WoT You Feeling. I first want to start with a sincere thank you for everyone who's joining us and tuning in to watch. The show is designed to be a thoughtful and engaging exploration into the mental and emotional health aspects of the world of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. We are hoping to create an open discussion about mental health, the role of society, and how these two can be viewed through a lens of empathy and support. Joining us, as always, are Miki and Christine, and our guest for this show is Morgan from Podcast of the Dragon. And as a reminder, this show is full spoilers. And let me get the music going. Sorry about that. How's everyone doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm having a great time. I'm super excited to have Morgan on. I've been wanting you to come on this show for a while, Morgan. I think you're going to add a lot to the discussion.
Well, I hope so.
I hope so. So we are talking about our Carl Jung's theories as it relates to Wheel of Time. We came across this discussion in a fun way. Miki, want to start? Tell us how we started this?
Yeah, I mean, we meet and think about like topics we can talk about for this show, and we get into our geeky selves, and we were nerding out, and like somewhere along the line this topic came up of like, what if we were talking about how people like have different reactions to Nynaeve, like, you know, sometimes they love her and sometimes they hate her, and sometimes that changes, you know, when they're young and they feel one way then, and then they feel a different way when they're older. And so like the idea came up of like, well, what if Nynaeve's like a projective test, you know, like one of those Rorschach inkblot tests, and then it just kind of like bloomed from there, because Ryan, then you started kind of like thinking like from this Jungian perspective, and like, you know, what do other characters mean and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, and then it turns out that all three of us are huge fans of Jungian theory and Jungian psychology. And we're going to get into it. We're going to try and keep the terminology simplified and less heady, and we're just going to kind of go broad strokes on the concepts. One thing I want to emphasize with Jung is that he's one of the grand theorists of psychology. So if you were going to take an X-Acto knife to his theories and try and study them with the scientific method in mind, he's going to come up short. But I like to think of Jung as more of like a poetic interpretation of my experience. He helps me understand the world in ways that a lot of my studies in psychology left me wanting. Once I discovered Jung, it felt like a world opened up to me that felt relevant to me for one of the first times. I was doing a lot of like research in psychology when I first started in the field. So while we talk about this, just keep that in mind. We're going to be talking about concepts like archetypes, and we're going to break them down, but we're going to try and make this as fun as humanly possible, right? So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to try and involve everyone in chat with the discussion, and we're going to try and come up to some consensuses about what we are, certain aspects of the theories. We're going to try and relate it to the books in ways, and it should be fun. Our first activity is going to be talking about Jungian archetypes, and I think it's going to be fun to go through the archetypes, and let's all come to agreements about which character in the books fit each archetype, and we will do that for the first part. And let's see how this goes. This is kind of new for us. I'm going to be doing polls, so if I look distracted, it's not that I'm not engaged in the conversation. I'm just going to be running some polls while we do this. But yeah, how about we start off with Christine? You want to give us just the briefest overview of what the archetype, what Jung is getting at when he means by archetypes, and then we can go into them one at a time.
Absolutely. So Jung has this idea that he sort of developed as he was working with schizophrenic patients in a hospital. These were people who, at that time, for the most part, were treated very badly, right? There wasn't really any mental health support available to people. It was, if you were different in any way, you were kind of shut away and forgotten. And he was interested in helping these people. So he went in and he would just sit there and listen to them and talk to them. And one of the things that he noticed as they talked, because you have to remember that there was no medication for schizophrenia. There was really no treatment at all. So he would just let them talk, and he would listen to their stories and listen to their delusions. And he started noticing these patterns in the way that they were expressing their delusions. So that was sort of like the genesis of the development of the archetypes, was his noticing these commonalities between these different people. And so then from there, he kind of, drew from different mythological traditions and religious traditions and things like that, and developed the 4 main archetypes and then a bunch of sub archetypes, which, now we have 12. So we have 12 total archetypes. And yeah, it's really relatable. So I like what you said, Ryan, about how you think of this as a more poetic interpretation rather than something that would hold up to the scientific method, because I think that's a really good description. People like Jung because he's very relatable in a lot of ways. And because the archetypes draw from these different traditions, someone with a background in tarot is going to be familiar with the concept of archetypes. Someone with a background in psych or in mythology, like all of these different things, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I kind of think I know what that means. So.
Yeah. And bringing Jungian interpretations into literature and art kind of, I think, is just appropriate for the way Jung kind of thought about the world. He was very open-minded and very open-ended in his theories. It's frustrating for hard scientists to kind of grasp Jung because he was so willing to pivot with new information and new experiences. I think he's fascinating in that way when you start to really get into it. I like this little right here.
Yeah, great.
But when we get into the idea of the archetypes, there are 12 archetypes, and each one of them have specific characteristics.
Right.
And so let's do an activity where we go through the archetypes. And Christine, do you have a list of them in front of you?
I do.
All right, let's follow you. How about you give us the archetype, and then give us the list, and let's start discussing. Let's just start role modeling the discussion, and then we'll bring it to chat.
You got it. All right. So the sage, the sage would be the first archetype, someone who values knowledge and logic, someone who, has advice, always has little quips ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was looking earlier, because again, I'm definitely no Jungian analyst. I don't this is just ideas that I like. I just like the theory. I like Jungian concepts and stuff. So this is kind of new for me. And I posted a few places today that I was geeking out on this idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I found that is cool is that these 12 archetypes can also be broken down into 4 subsets. And the sage is in this subset of the explorer spirituality sort of subset. And so, yeah, the sage is about understanding and constantly seeking the truth.
Yeah.
Kind of like a spiritual seeker.
Mm-hmm. So less hard science. Yeah, more almost do you think Jung thought of himself as a sage?
Well, so here's the thing that's really interesting, right? I think Jung would say nobody would think of anybody, should think of anybody as an archetype, right? Because, and these are archetypal images. Jung would even say that we can't even actually, it gets really complicated, right? He would say the archetypes are so big that we can't even understand them, that these are archetypal images that help us metaphorically understand this belief set that has arisen. And so, but yeah, I think he probably related really strongly with the sage. I'm smiling because I'm wondering if even Jordan might part of Robert Jordan might reflect or identify with the sage, the person seeking wisdom or seeking to share wisdom, right, with others.
Mm-hmm. So so when I think of the sage, Interestingly, I think of Varen.
Yeah.
And then I want to say, who is the researcher in the academy that Rand was building? We have that one.
Oh, Fell.
Yes.
What's his name?
Paradfell?
Paradfell.
Parenfell.
Yeah.
So am I?
Paradfell, yeah.
Yeah.
Parad, yeah, with an H.
Oh, I think Fell. That's a great example, right? Because if we think about somebody who's like,
because the thing I was reading said like the one, like if you look at the darker side of the sage, one of the drawbacks is in inaction, right? Like this is somebody who's like constantly seeking wisdom but doesn't actually like do a whole lot with it. They're just like gathering information and then dispersing information but not like putting it into action.
Yeah, not taking those risks, right? Perhaps.
Right. So this is someone who probably spends a lot of time in their head thinking about the knowledge that they've acquired.
Maybe, but yeah, I'm noticing in chat, right? Like Dan, brother Dan mentions Elias might be a sage.
I like that. Yep. So I'm going to come up with a poll. Who do we think the sage is? And we're going to come up with a definitive answer. Morgan, who are you thinking fits this archetype the most?
Well, so I don't know, because it's sort of like, yeah, I'm fairly ignorant about this kind of stuff, and I've done a little hasty research, but how much inaction do you need? Because I feel like Tom Maryland fits in this sort of desire to dispense information in all of this and way, and mostly he's used as a conduit to pass stuff off to other people. He does engage in action, so it's like, but I would think that people don't have to fit super closely to archetypes. I mean, nobody fits that closely, so especially if people have multiple, so I would think that Tom would be a really good one.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I like what you pointed out too, is that like we aren't going to fit as a singular archetype. And I think one of the things that's really cool about Jordan's writing is like he writes characters who are complex enough that I don't think we're going to hit many characters that are just purely represented by one archetype in here. And I think that's why we like the characters. I think we've probably all been exposed to other writing or art where it's a little more like concise. Well,
he also hits upon like the real truth that people are contradictory and often hypocritical, and so they will very blatantly display conflicting traits, and it's totally believable. So yeah,
and I think he gives his characters room to grow, which is a very human thing.
Yeah,
and I think too that's part of the warning that Jung gave us about not adhering too strictly to archetypes when we're talking about people and trying to categorize them, because there's room for growth. We can grow and we can change. And I mean, like, for example, archetypes are used in personality tests. And I'm not a huge fan of personality tests because sometimes people will sort of go, oh no, I'm this. That's all that there is to it. And that can be a little dangerous. So it's great to use things like archetypes as sort of a guide to try to maybe understand people, but not as a be all end all. And Jordan was great about that. I love the way you think you've got a character figured out, and then 6 books later, they do something you're like, oh wait, okay, I guess, all right, we're doing something new now.
Yeah, and I would remind, I guess, everyone that Jung was pulling these concepts from studies of history, ancient like creation myths, like different cultural myths and cultural beliefs that he was just studying around the world. So he was taking these from like sources that were so historically outdated that they are forced to be simplified just to span the test of time. So he's thinking these concepts have to be simplified because so they span all cultures and all time, and they'll be relevant for time and memoriam, I guess. So they're not, Robert Jordan's characters are super complicated, So it's interesting. We might be just kind of running into like a limitation of this activity as we do it.
Yeah, and I would think that when you're doing research and you're trying to take things from, myths and legends and everything from everywhere, I would think that especially, with cultures with more limited history, you would be making myths and legends, and the people or the archetypes that you'd be portraying are people being how they're supposed to be. And so that doesn't leave a lot of room for, variation or deviation necessarily. So that's my...
Awesome. So we have 8 votes in our first official WoT You Feeling poll. I'm ending the poll right now. Drum roll. It looks like Herod Fell is the sage, the consensus sage character. All
That's
right.
cool.
Yeah.
That's fun. All right, let's move on, and we might not do all 12.
I know, right? We'll be here all night. All right. Well, if we're not going to do all 12, there are a couple that actually I'd like to pick out if we could, because I think...
Would it be more helpful to do the main ones?
Oh, I don't know. I kind of like the 12 subtypes.
To breaking them. Okay, yeah, let's break them down then.
Yeah. I mean, is it cool if I
We
just
got
kind of
time.
pick out a few instead of us going through all of them?
Sure.
Just
Let's try that.
for the sake of time. All right. So let's talk about the caregiver.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So right here we have, it says their goal is to help others. Their flaw is martyrdom. And their skill is compassion. I can definitely think of certain humans in my life that fall into that. But we're talking Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add too in that the breakdown of the quadrants that they fall into, the caregiver falls into the group that provides structure within your world.
Oh, I hate structure.
So you are not the
All right.
caregiver.
But I do like to be held like a little baby. All right.
So you like other people creating some structure that holds you, and
Yes.
so that you can be.
No,
free
but
to
I
do
don't want to
whatever
be
you
told
want.
what to do. So it says I'm a contradiction in terms.
So you're not the
You've
rebel.
got the outlaw in you, the rebel.
Or you are the rebel, rather. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So first come to mind. Who are you thinking right off the bat? It seems like there's some obvious ones, right? Caregiver.
Yeah. What do you think, Morgan? Who do you think would be the caregiver / mother figure?
I mean, yeah, Nynaeve seems like the obvious one, though. I don't know that I see her as, like, having a flaw of martyrdom. I think her major flaw is a lack of self-awareness. But, like we said, these are so simplified. I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily see Maureen as a caregiver type, but she, I mean, she does have a lot of compassion. She just doesn't strike me as nurturing.
No. No. After the third time,
Well,
she
okay,
threatens to
she's-
kill everybody. Like, I think.
That's the thing about the Jungian archetypes that's so interesting, right? Each archetype has a shadow version of itself, right?
Right,
The mother
okay.
figure has the kind and gentle nurturer, but there's also the cruel and controlling mother figure too, the harsh mother figure, and sometimes perhaps Moraine
Is often a Karen, yeah.
The Mistress of Novices. Are we going that far?
Oh,
Maybe. Yeah. Actually,
So I really
wouldn't
like
have thought of
Brother-
her as a caregiver, but
Brother Dan came in with Lan.
Lan is a
interesting.
caregiver.
I think that's I like flipping that because and I'm going to say Perrin.
I would call Lan like an emotionally unavailable caregiver. In a
And
lot of ways.
I would actually say that in some ways Rand meets the criteria of the caregiver. Like, he is in many ways driven to be of service which is what the caregiver is for, and that martyrdom piece, right? This willingness to give of oneself.
Yeah, I would say both Lan and Rand are very self-sacrificing. So
That's interesting. That my first connotation with martyrdom is very negative. Like, it's not self-sacrifice. It's like an expression of how you convey yourself to the world. So that's interesting. You guys went more with just like martyrdom is like an act of goodness. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my original perception of it was, the melodramatic, affectation that somebody has. But when I thought about it, it's sort of like, there is a sense of, utter self-sacrifice as well, which is not a good thing, but not a toxic trait necessarily, or only toxic to oneself. So,
how about Elaine's mom? No, not Elaine. Egwin's mom. I'm sorry, Egwin. Marin Alvear.
Oh, yeah. She's everyone's mom. She's the mom who bakes. Like, everyone wants to come to your house because it always smells good, like baking food.
But she's also like hiding Aes Sedai and shit. Like, she was all like, quickly had like a underground web of going on.
She's got that phone tree like in place.
And she provides the structure too. Like, I remember I was really struck by that scene when Perrin and Fael show up and they've got the Aiel with them, and she's just like, they give them like the gold salt well or whatever, and she's like, oh, okay, thank you, that's very nice and everything, and not reacting like that's like a year's worth of income for them or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, so second official poll is up. Let's find out who will be the consensus caregiver archetype. We got Nynaeve, Lan Rand, and Marin Alvear.
I love Marin Alvear.
I'm excited to see what y'all have to say.
I want her to be my mom.
I think my knee jerk is Nynaeve, but like, then again, like, she does so much, right? She does so much. But that does seem to be like her driving, like, motivating principle. Is care for others and love for others. So if I had a guess, of my vote would be Nynaeve for. What would be your guys' vote?
Well, I love Nynaeve, so I'm a little biased.
Yeah. But so you think it'd be Nynaeve, Christine?
I love her.
Who do you think Nynaeve would want to be? Let's look at this list.
I love her so much.
We're losing Christine. Start over.
Did you lose me? Am I here?
Just for a second.
Now.
You're back, kiddo.
Sorry.
What were you saying?
I was just saying that Nynaeve also has, I think she walks this line where she could potentially fall into martyrdom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think Nynaeve maybe has the drive to be the caregiver, but if I think of her actions, I mean, many of her actions are healing actions.
Mm-hmm.
But
is there a healing archetype
of service?
Right.
But but there's not a real like healing archetype that would probably fall under caregiver also, as I'm looking at it, unless the magician heals. Anyways, the polls. This is a resounding success. We have 11 votes. Let's end the poll right now. The consensus caregiver is Nynaeve.
Huh. Okay. Marin couldn't pull through, huh?
Oh, Marin.
But with 63% of the vote, Brother Dan didn't even vote for his own guess. Don't know what to make of that. Just stirring the pot. Awesome. Are you guys enjoying this in chat? I'm so glad everyone is here. Thank you so much for coming. We are just trying to look at these stories from a different lens, and we have good motivations. If you haven't yet, hit the like and subscribe button and join the conversation. We're going to do this monthly, and if you have any suggestions for topics, please let us know. Join us in Discord and Twitter. All right, so let's jump into another archetype. Christine, who do you want to talk about next?
Yeah, how about the hero? Let's talk about the hero. The hero, boy, once they have a cause, forget it. They're going to burn it all down to meet that cause.
Mm-hmm. All right. Their flaws are their need to fight, and their skill is courage.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing about their flaws too, I feel like it's important to point out that it's not that this archetype necessarily possesses the flaws that are stated. It's that there's a danger of them sort of leaning that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. Like I hear that definition and I think I want that to be me, but it's not. And that's a function of this also. Our characters themselves are carrying around these conceptions of the world also. Like maybe some of our characters wish they were the hero, but they're really the Joker. Maybe some character, right? I mean, like I don't mean to be so leading, but that's actually a very huge facet of like Matt's character. He wants to be one way, but he truly is another way. And it's interesting to look at that in ourselves too, because once you start reading that, I'm like, oh, that's totally me. And then I'm like, no, it's not. Shit.
It's
right.
Like
so yeah, so it's like it's my positive self, like it's my positive shadow. We'll get into that also, but it's fun about positive and negative shadows. But yeah, so back to the books though, we have
and I was going to add to the hero, defining the hero. So the hero, it's in that quadrant that's really driven about leaving legacy. So that's one of their like core drivers there, and then overcoming obstacles is another piece that's apparently pretty central to the and mastery of skill and overcoming obstacles.
So that's like Wayne.
There we go.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. Like I think of Rand, but then like how much of it is an acceptance of the role is a part of it, right? Because I mean, he had to be the hero, but he never wanted to be. Like, but there are definite characters who want to be heroes and do heroic things as well. Correct?
Right. And MaTsDaGger mentioned their swan as a possible example of this archetype.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
That's true. I always think of Galad when I think about just, because the danger of the hero is that they can just completely have blinders on, right? Good for the sake of good without really thinking about the collateral damage that can come when you're so singularly driven. So at their core, they want to be good, and their motivation is to do good, but good can be such a subjective term that they sort of miss, like all the little nuances along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Danjman actually has Galad and Gawain as heroes. Ooh, I love Mandarb comes in with Logain as hero. I love it.
Yeah, I could see Logain. Like that one really resonates for me.
Is Gawain? Do we want to group up Galad and Gawain together, or just?
This seems a terrible disservice to Galad.
I mean,
that's how my brother felt about every time I had to go play with him as a kid. He's like, "Oh no, you got to bring Gawain."
But if what Christine is saying about Galad getting too hyper focused, right? Like this is the shadow version of, or the unhealthy version of the hero. I think Gawain might meet that too. Like getting so hyper focused on a goal. And I think I used the example in our short of like, charging in when he thinks he knows right, but he really just has misinformation.
All right, well, we have 4 slots. Already I have Egwene, Swan, Galad, Gross, and Logain. How do we squeeze Gawain in there? Do we take someone out?
I think that's a good group.
I think it's a good group. All right.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. I love it. This is great. The way of the pole.
WoT You Pulling.
WoT You Feeling. Yeah.
Well, and if we're thinking about the hero too, like in a lot of the stuff that I was reading or watching about Jungian analysis, often the hero is kind of the primary archetype of the self. I think, and it's because we often see ourselves as the hero, right? Like we see there's a piece of us that is pulled to overcome the obstacles and move towards what is right, and leave a legacy, leaving a piece of ourself in there. And I just thought that was funny, because how often do we walk around the world thinking that we are the hero in this story right now?
I think often. Actually, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
I do, until I look in a mirror, and then I'm like, what's going on?
Honestly think that's the thing for like compassionate people who have lives where they feel like they've dodged a lot of bullets, because there's so much suffering in the world, and the idea of people suffering, or that you're just lucky and bad things can happen to you and you've only just been dodging bullets this whole time. So thinking of yourself in the as the hero or the center of the story means that bad stuff might not happen to you, because I can see
It's a great point.
Yeah,
That's
a
a really great point.
So it can be a form of self-protection then.
Yeah, I think there's a term like
the hero.
Solipsism is like you're the only one who's really real, because like you're the. I think that's I could be totally wrong, but yeah, I think that's a thing for people, because they don't want to think that other people suffer, and they don't want to worry that they might someday really suffer. So.
All right, solipsism, the view or theory that the self is all that can be known to exist. Yes. Is there any character in our book series here who is solipsistic? I like that. That's fun. Let's talk about that.
Lanfear.
That sounds like a Forsaken trait.
Yeah.
Seriously, all of them. Yeah.
That's like the basis of Moradin's true existential crisis.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Now,
that's the title of our next show, Moradin's Existential Crisis.
Yes, beautiful. Yes. I do want to point out, it's interesting. So far, we've been going through some archetypes, and not. It seems like not one Forsaken has been brought up, and that's interesting, because the Forsaken are so well written that they're like, I don't think they'll ever fit one of these. Like, right? Like, they're so beyond the pale. I mean, I don't know what you guys think about that, but I've been noticing that so far no one's brought up a Forsaken, and I was wondering what that meant. For me, it felt like it's just like they're so old and they're so.
Yeah, maybe we should do that as a reverse poll as our next one to the chat of like, let's name a Forsaken, and then give chat the option of some of the archetypes and see who they think that Forsaken matches.
You said that there are a lot of like, the shadow aspects to the archetypes. So maybe the negative traits to them would be things to explore.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah. So, yeah, actually, that's probably just a really nice segue into a discussion of shadow theory and what is called projective identity, which is the notion that we have parts of ourselves that we deny, we don't want to accept, and those parts, be them negative or positive, come out in our day-to-day interactions with the world.
Is it like Balsamon?
It might be, or more. I mean, I think this is like kind of a sexy. If you really look at this might not be so. It might be like a pretty sexy thing for these two, but.
I mean, unless that's Balefire that's happening there.
Like Balefire.
I mean, talk about being swept off your feet. All right, so very specifically though, shadow as conceived by Carl Jung is an idea of how we are whole, and what it means to be a whole person is to understand that we are both light and dark, and to deny aspects of ourselves is limiting our own capacities to grow and become what he would call a fully individuated human being. So his whole goal is to synthesize the self in ways through acceptance and self-exploration. And one of the ways was he was able to identify through the use of projection. And he would analyze art, he would analyze his interactions, he would analyze his patients, and he would write about it extensively. And he would learn about his true self in the things that he hated. Like, so like if there's a part of himself that he really, really didn't like, and he didn't want to accept that he was maybe prone to demean women or prone to kick children. I don't know, whatever it is, it's very specific, but like he doesn't want to walk around thinking, man, I'm really not nice to women. He will see someone acting not nice to a woman and have a more visceral response to that. And that was one of the ways he would analyze his own life. He'd like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Why am I having this kind of emotional response to someone? This person has no control over me. They're just living their lives. Why am I responding this way? And he was able to see that he had like things that he needed to accept about himself. And once he started accepting these different things, he would stop having these emotional responses. So one way of looking at literature, like we're going to try and do, is look at our favorite characters in the books and our least favorite characters and try and look at them in a way like through the eyes of Jung, where it's like, what can we learn about ourselves by looking at these kind of like the polar extremes of like our relationship to the characters in the book. So we can talk about the entire series. And I think this might be a fun conversation. And then as we're talking about this, I do want to think about the idea of how our favorite characters have changed also. And chat, you can think about this too. When you first read this 20 years ago, who were your favorite characters and who were your least favorite characters? And when you read them over and over again, how has it changed? And do you think that says anything about you as a person? So yeah, that's the introduction. Jung was the forefront of this theory, so big ups to Jung. Who would like to go first? In terms of, let's talk about our favorite characters.
Well, one of the things I find really interesting about this idea, right, is that I think for a lot of people, there are certain characters that for some people there are strong favorites, and other people also strongly dislike that character. And so I think for me, Egwene is one of my favorite characters, but I know that there are many people out there who feel very strongly that they don't like Egwene. And so I just think it's interesting how so that you can have that strong reaction both ways to a character.
Yeah. I have an interesting experience in the sense that, I started reading the books in the 90s when I was a teenager. And so my experience of rereading is such that there are characters that are introduced later on that I didn't get to meet until I was an adult. And so it's sort of like I was really a big fan of Rand in the beginning, particularly because I identified very much with his progression of his mental health issues through basically the first 6 books or so, probably up to Demise Wells, especially going through struggles with mental health issues through my teenage years and into my very early 20s. And then once Egwene gets into this position where I feel like her arc takes off in book 6 and she suddenly has this job where her skills are put to the test and she doesn't have to keep occupying herself in ways that are sometimes kind of toxic. She becomes my top favorite, but Moraine and Rand were kind of my favorite when I was a kid, partly because those were the books that I had, and they're the books that she was alive in, and the books where it was pre one of his worst traumas, where he's emotionally shuts down and becomes a lot harder to identify with. And then afterwards, Egwene kind of takes over for me. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned Rand in that way because I had kind of a similar experience with Rand. You know, I read the books the first time, and he kind of, I mean, he was fine, but he kind of got on my nerves a little bit, to be honest. You know, I found myself getting impatient with him. And then when I did the next read through, I had experienced things, you know, and I had like had a PTSD diagnosis. And so when I went back and reread his story arc, I recognized in him things that were happening with me. And so it made me much more compassionate as a reader, because I thought, you know, he's not trying to be a dick. Like, he's not trying to be rude. He's not trying to hurt the people around him. He honestly just can't cope. And there's so much being thrown at him that he doesn't ever have time to process. And it just honestly, like, I kind of want to cry about it just talking about it now, because it's so real. And I think anyone who has experienced trauma in that way, and then has experienced having to try to navigate relationships while you're going through this trauma and not knowing how to deal with it, it can be a very isolating and very harmful experience emotionally. And I think Robert Jordan did a great job of putting that on paper in a way that is so real and so relatable, that, you know, I think a lot of people identify with Rand if they have that history of hurt, you know, like he does.
Wow, thank you, Christine. That's awesome. Thanks. Well said. In my reread, I got to the part where the ladies, all three, become warders with him, bond him, and I think it's in Elaine's perspective, and her first thought was just like, how are you standing up right now? Like, I mean, and it was so powerful, and I'm getting emotional too, like, because it would. And I agree with you also that I did not really fully appreciate Rand's storyline. I wanted him to just get to the cut to the chase, do something, right, fix something. And now I love how well paced it is, and how really through the gauntlet, like Robert Jordan runs Rand through. And hard, you know, to take a young boy and just harden him to. But then, I mean, we can get into that. Like, he has to not be hard. He's hard and not hard, and that's a whole another thing. Which is, I think, kind of Jung would have a field day analyzing Rand, because of Rand's overall arc. Is like he had to synthesize the hard and the soft. He had to kind of like embody the yin yang for him to become like Bodhisattva Rand, kind of floating around like healing shit and growing trees and stuff. Like, he needed to like transcend, you know, in a very spiritual and emotional way and psychological way, his own like limitations by, I think, reminding, you know, and Tam helps him remind himself of like, there's like, for every force, there's like the allowance, and for every hardness, there's, you know, the opposite. So, Jung would have, it's fun to think about how Jung would have really like delved into like, and I often times wonder how much about Jungian theory like Robert Jordan himself knew. I wonder if he actually went to therapy himself also. Do we know this at all? Has Robert Jordan gone to therapy? Let's ask Harriet. Okay.
Let's put her on the phone. Harriet. Personal question.
All right. So I love the discussion. It's fun to look at these things. Have you had a change in perspective on characters that you were surprised as you got older? Feel free to jump in. Morgan, you really summarized your stuff, but yeah, what were you gonna say, Morgan?
I mean, I've worked very hard on this read through and doing my podcast to cultivate a sense of empathy for Nynaeve, because she's a character that I've struggled with. And one of the reasons that I realized I struggled with her so hard is because I was a kid who was bullied really hard, you know, or really badly as a kid. And she's such a bully early on in the stories. And so I had to take the time to stop and think about, why she's so angry, to remember what it was like to be, in my early 20s, and try to think about what it would be like to be in a position of power and in her shoes, because I know in her shoes, dealing with people like that, I would just be like, okay, well, you're all on your own, and walk away, because I have my own ways of dealing with stress, and I just don't care enough about people like that to put up with that. I would just take care of myself and walk away. But she is self-sacrificing enough to struggle to try to, assert her authority. And Jordan writes it in a bullying fashion, and I feel like part of that is just the Two Rivers stubbornness of everybody doubles down, and so it seems like bullying is one of the ways to do that. But I have such a visceral reaction to that I really struggled with her for so long. And then also just her lack of self-awareness, because I struggle with that too, even though I know that when I was younger I was much less self-aware, and so I've had to be mindful and actually really work hard to try to think why he wrote her that way. And it's been very helpful to just take the time and think about what was going through his mind when he wrote this character, and I've been doing that a lot for different characters that I struggle with more.
I'm really resonating with what you're saying, because kind of from the opposite side, because I think Nynaeve was one of the characters from the get-go that I resonated with. And it's interesting is I think you and I probably started reading the books at the same time, like mid-90s is when I started reading them. But I related to Nynaeve like right away. Over the last like 6 months or so, it's been really interesting, because I've been, I'm in leadership roles, and, have to oversee people. And my direct supervisor, also a psychologist, pointed out, hey, Miki, you often jump to protecting people when maybe they just need support. And it was like a punch in the gut, and talk about like having, a moment to be like, oh, so what I was projecting onto Nynaeve was this protector role, right? Like people would need support and saving, and I need to go run and go get my kids and bring them back to the, Two Rivers, whether they want it or not. Right. And the problem with being the protector is you infantilize people. So it was just a really interesting thing to be in the middle of a reread, and also be giving this feedback about myself. And all of a sudden, the way I'm seeing Nynaeve is shifting too, where I'm like, well, you could just support people there instead of like jumping in to protect them, Nynaeve. Oh gosh, Miki, maybe you could just support people right there instead of jumping in to protect them, right? So.
Yeah. I learned this concept called the dignity of risk when you're caring for individuals. Like, you gotta let them take their own risks, and there's dignity in that, and that's part of being a human being. I just want to go back, and we were talking about some of our favorite characters and least favorite. MaTsDaGger says, I couldn't stand Nynaeve when I first read Wheel of Time. As an older parent, I freaking love her.
Yeah.
Egwin is great if you headcanon some things out.
Yeah. One of the things I like about Nynaeve is I feel like her characterization is spot on, and that he's her best written character. With Egwene, I feel like she is mischaracterized in several spots, and I feel like part of that is that Jordan does fail to a certain extent when he writes women. And I also acknowledge, when it comes to Nynaeve's arc, that I have not had a normal experience moving through the world as a woman. And part of that, I acknowledge that, because men don't treat me the way they do most women. And so I have to take that into account.
Can you go back a little bit?
Is it the brass knuckles you walk around all the time with?
It's because I look like a boy.
Oh, okay, that's it.
Anyway, what, Christine?
I was just going to say, I thought it was interesting what you started saying about Egwene, and where you feel like he sort of dropped the ball a little bit when he was writing her. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, yeah, particularly the scene in the Fires of Heaven with like her creepy, rapey dream monsters that she puts on Nynaeve. It's sort of like, are you equating that scene to when Amis, puts a monster on Egwene in book 4, because like, was that what he was planning? Because I cannot imagine Egwene ever doing something like that. That particular nightmare is so different from any other type of nightmare. Like, I can totally see any other type of nightmare, which in the whole world of RJ's, spankings and tough love and all that other kind of stuff is completely believable. But that particular type of nightmare, I cannot see, particularly with how prudish she is and just how it just does not resonate as something, and when the Wheel Weaves podcast, when Danny and Brett got to that chapter, Danny was like, I thought it was part of the nightmare because I didn't think it was Egwene when that happened. And I was just kind of like, yeah, exactly. I don't feel like that's Egwene. So I feel like it's a terrible mischaracterization that frustrates me. And I feel like if somebody asked him, was it your intent for people to take away from that scene that, it was a sexual assault that happened, he would look at you with like a shocked Pikachu face, because I don't think that was his intent. And they don't even think about it afterwards. And it's just kind of like, so I don't think that that's like, I feel like that's like a dumb man wrote that without even thinking about it or something. I don't get it. So anyway, that's how I feel about that. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know.
I never thought about it that way, honestly, because when I've read it, I did think it was Egwene. And for me, it was such a jarring moment the first time I read that, because I thought, whoa, like, I was totally in your court, girl. Like, I thought you were amazing. You were such a badass. And then you do this to your friend, like not just your friend, but someone who kind of raised you. And so I really struggled with Nynaeve as a character after that, because I just couldn't really reconcile that type of behavior with this person who was then going to be leading all of these women, so. Yeah,
I feel like he did her dirty with that, because I just don't, and it's like, and mischaracterization happens. Like, I have a novel sitting in my drawer where I got to the end of it and I'm like, I've put an aspect in this character that, looking back, that's totally unbelievable to the rest of the character. What am I supposed to do with this now? So it happens. And so I just, and that's one of the things about criticizing the Wheel of Time, is that there's so much to criticize at the same time there's so much to praise. And I appreciate that, because, I don't know, it makes it more interesting to talk about it.
Yes. Well, it does, but then I think it would be fair to point out, could that be part of her shadow self, right? I think as human beings and as individuals, we all have moments that we are not proud of, where if we could take it back, we would take it back in a second. And, for Egwene, obviously that was particularly heinous what she did. As a woman reading it, it's just like, oh my God, but I kind of have to wonder if that's part of the lesson in this too, is that sometimes we do things that we really wish we hadn't done, that really are truly harmful to the people that we care about.
Does she ever circle back around and even think about it later?
Never mentioned again. Nobody ever. No. Nynaeve doesn't think about it again. That's why I'm always like, with the writing
Nynaeve thinks
of it.
about the tea. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That feels like my mind has wrapped it around to be like, oh, okay, she's repressed the sexual assault, and so the tea now represents the entire thing for her. But that's, I think, me trying to be generous about Jordan's writing in that. I mean, I think I've always interpreted it as Jordan was writing a nightmare about something that he knew conceptually would be scary, to be a woman and to be sexually assaulted in that way. But it seemed like there was an empathetic miss in his writing of it. Like, that it's like, oh, in theory, that's a scary thing, like a crocodile trying to eat you. But I haven't lived either.
But at the same time, it's sort of like, because it's in the books, I don't judge people for being completely put off by Egwene because it's in the text, So it's just sort of like, and literature is there for interpretation. So it's like, at that point, But I just...
Is there some to this notion that, like, some of our characters kind of embody past lives? And have you ever thought about, I mean, I feel like Rand obviously has it, and we see it because Rand has the narrative in his head. He actually, we see him grappling with it. But I've always felt that Egwene's ability to kind of level up so quickly.
Uh-huh.
Figure shit out without knowing things. Do weaves that she's never been able to do before. I always thought that had something to do with her being a past soul and somehow having like epigenetic memories in a way, or right,
or maybe
abilities.
there's a collective unconscious, perhaps,
Oh,
that they're
bring it
able
back.
to
Yeah.
tap into.
Oh, nicely played, Miki.
Yeah, well,
No, I've thought about that. It's because Rand does some horrifying things as well.
yeah.
Talk about things he
Yeah.
regrets, like, you know, very early on he's like attacking groups of like people and like staking them like in positions and doing weird he got really weird, I think book 3, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, like, so shadow self, like, so we've been talking kind of our favorite characters, and let's kind of dive into our least favorite characters. And I think this is kind of fertile ground for like this notion of like, why do we really hate these questions? And Brother Dan, you have a great question I'm going to get to afterwards. So I've started that. If anyone else has questions, let us know. I am monitoring chat, and I love all the engagement. But yeah, so least favorite characters. What are you guys thinking? I have so many.
Well, I was going to ask you, Ryan, because you didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so so least favorite characters. I think Elida like pops out as one of my least favorite characters, and also, and I think one of the reasons why is that she seems so disingenuous and lying to herself. Mm-hmm. And I don't trust people like that. Like they're like the further away a person is from who they say they are, I have like a visceral distrusting response. So like so my shadow self is like, I don't want anyone ever think I'm disingenuous. So I'm like, I'm going to be as real as humanly possible, because I think that's one of the most like that's like the scarlet letter. Like if you were to call me like fake, I'd be like, oh. So that's my Achilles heel. That's my shadow self, and I think it comes out in my hatred of Elida.
Yeah, Elida's interesting, right? If I'm looking down here at my like notes about the different archetypes, and I'm thinking about like who Elida, who might represent Elida, and the magician's standing out to me because, right, the magician is about power and leaving a legacy and, manipulating knowledge and the elements. And because I think Elida is one of those that's really interesting because she is the hero of her own story. And
yes,
I think that's one of the things that makes her fascinating. She's not like some of the Forsaken who are just like, yeah, we're the hero, but we're evil and we know it.
But she wants to be a hero. She wants it to be in her name. She's like, in the name of Elida Dole, blah, 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 whatever it is. Like, she is like, in her own thoughts, she's like, I want that glory. It's going to be in my name. It's going to be I'm going to save it because I'm the one who, almost like a kind of Trump, like, I'm the only one who could fix this. Like, she kind of came in as like, I am the only one who could fix this.
I mean, it's funny because with Elida, I would hesitate to categorize her as the magician, because when she affects change, it's usually self-serving in a way and not necessarily for the greater good. So like at some point, Elaine brings up the fact that she was always making flowers, right? She's always making flowers. She could have been making food.
Right?
She could have been making it so that people weren't starving, but she's using her power to make things of beauty, objects that really have no permanent value to people who are hungry.
She believes it's for the greater good, right? Like we might judge it of not being for the greater good, but does she believe that it's for the greater good?
I don't know. That's a good question, actually.
I don't know whether her own glory and the greater good start and end with her. She's complicated like that.
Yeah, well, so I did an episode on the coup recently, and so I went over the scene where we first meet Elida, and she's sitting on a stool and she's knitting, and it's described in Rand's point of view that there's something terrible about her concentration, and I was just kind of like, that kind of sounds like the Fates, and so I googled the 3 Fates, and they're 3 sisters who share an eye and can see the future, and I'm like, he did that on purpose,
Yeah,
and
awesome.
it's just sort of like, And I
That's
thought that was
great.
really, really cool. You know, and it was like the first time I ever came across that, but it's just sort of like because she's someone who is determined that things will be how she wills it, which means her vision of how everything is, or her view of reality is to her design, how she sees things is,
Yeah.
because she just knows everything. She's already figured it all out.
She's kind
Yeah,
of like
she feels-
Grendel in that way, right? Where everything serves a purpose, like a place for everything and everything in its place. And she will construct things to sort of fit that narrative that she's created for herself.
Yeah, if you think about the trinkets she surrounds herself with, like the little, you know, what are they? The little figurines, and even the clock, you know, like she picks that clock on for a reason. It is there to send a message to herself as well as other people.
All right, real quickly, going back to the Egwene. So yeah, Egwene is the reincarnation of Eldrine. My question to chat is, do you think that has any bearing on her personality? Do you think there's any way you could look at some of the decisions she makes? Like we're talking about some of the negative decisions. Could they be like related to this, or is it just? Or do you think she gets abilities from this? Like, what do you think it all means for her to be the reincarnation of Eldrine? Except for I know the old end, she burns herself out and all that shit. I mean, she, like, narratively, she does it. She kind of completes that arc. But do you think it has anything to do with the substance of her personality as well? All right, but yeah, sorry, go on. We're still talking about Elida. Dan says Elida is sincere but wrong. She simply misread the importance of the royal line in the last battle, or whatever. So this is a good question. Dan's coming up with some good questions. Is Egwene and Eldrine the same archetype? And I would imagine that
I think, honestly, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you.
No, yeah, actually, go.
I think Egwene, of all of the characters, probably represents the most archetypes, because RJ wrote her to be the most complicated person because she had to represent all Ajas and none. So I think there are very few archetypes that she doesn't embody. Nice.
Now, what do you think about the idea that the reincarnate, and I actually think Dan's touching on something that Jung would, again, I would have loved to have Jung to read this stuff, because Jung studied cultures that believed in reincarnation and studied these systems of belief. So would he accept that Egwene and Eldrine are the same archetype? I'd imagine he would. I imagine that's probably what Robert Jordan's possibly getting at. They're not the direct reincarnation. They're fulfilling archetypal narratives and structures that are like symbolically like passed down through generations, is kind of what I imagine he would say.
Right. And I think one description that I read about archetypes too is that they're like the Russian nesting dolls, in that, you know, each archetype has archetypes within itself. So like you can talk about the hero archetype, but then it's I don't know, like it spreads out, and there's all these like subcategories of hero archetypes. And so I think that Egwene and Eldrine can be the same archetype, but be presented slightly differently.
And I guess we can only make assumptions at this point through just kind of like the cosmology of the world, because we don't know enough about Eldrine, right? We just know the story. We never returned to Eldrine except for Maureen telling that story, correct?
I don't think so.
Not really.
I don't think so either. Yeah, okay.
Not really. Well, so as a character that I really dislike Tuon, and one of the reasons that I really dislike her is because I like her. Her inner narrative is so intelligent and clever and everything, but she has like zero personal growth, insists on drinking her own Kool-Aid, and it's like, I really struggle with people who are intelligent, who refuse to think their way out of bullshit. It's just sort of like, you have the brain, and so you don't have any excuse not to use it. And so that's a character I seriously dislike because of that. And I don't know what that says about my shadow self, except that one of my greatest flaws is impatience with other people's flaws, I guess.
You might be a little bit like Tuan in that way too.
Or if anybody has a flaw I can't stand, I'm just immediately like, away. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Harsh in the...
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I don't know, but yeah, I am so frustrated with her. I was talking on Twitter with someone because there was mention about how the show has managed to make characters that people dislike likable or complicated, and it's like, can they make her likable? And I'm like, I hope so. I hope they can give her some manner of growth, because first of all, I want to feel guilty for liking her. I want to feel conflicted and torn in a sense of self-loathing. I want all of that. Give me those feelings, but yeah, also because she's a character that deserves growth, and we deserve growth. So, yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot.
That's really insightful. That's
Yeah.
It is. I really like that, but by the same token, some people don't grow.
Yeah.
Some people just, don't ever grow. Maybe because they don't have to, and so maybe she's someone who's been in that unique position where she hasn't really had to grow, and she has had to be completely driven being empathetic towards other people, because it's really is a cutthroat environment that she was raised in.
Yeah. Well, Morgan and Christine, both of those points I really like, because I think what ends up happening, and I think, Morgan, you're naming this for yourself too, is that in these books, and I think in real life too, people have a gut reaction to somebody, like a dislike, and then they simplify it down by explaining it away by an action. Oh, Tuan maintains slavery. That's why I hate her. Well, yeah, that's a hateful thing that she does, but is that actually why, like, you don't like her? And like, Alana, right? I think, oh my gosh, you can't, like, I think that's thinking about the show, right? People are like, oh my gosh, I love Alana now. And it's like, yeah. And she ends up engaging in a really horrific act, a really hateful act, right? But is that, do we sometimes just project onto the action when really it's the person and everything, those characteristics that they bring to the table that we're actually having the reaction to?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and everybody does bad things. It's sort of like not everybody does really bad things, but I feel like we all do things we're not proud of, and or sometimes we all think things that we aren't proud of. Like, a lot of people really judge Egwene for her inner narrative in like books 3 and books 4, and I'm like, especially when I was younger, a lot of people must have been a lot nicer than I was, because it's sort of like, yeah, I've had a really judgmental inner narrative, but a lot of that stuff doesn't come out of her mouth, and so I feel like it's unfair to hate her for the things she thinks, because I don't know, it's just kind of like people oftentimes don't think super nice things, but they don't necessarily say them. And
Actually, I'm going to bring up this quote, one of my favorite ones from Jung. I think it fares well, and look at this cute little face. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious.
He's very existential. This is what I love about Jung.
Yeah.
And I guess people who have met him talk about he has like he is a little rascal. They talk about like this, like he's like a rapscallion. He has like a little like jester. Like he's probably more jester than anything, because he will entertain anything. He's not closed off.
Well, and I was I was hearing that his like two mentors, or maybe the people that he was really driven by were Freud and Nietzsche, and but found both of them lacking sort of in various ways. Like he found Freud's inability to hold the religious, and hence these like deeper cultural messages lacking. Like he said, you're missing something there, you're missing a big piece. With Nietzsche, it sounds like he was like a little too far off into space and philosophy and existentialism. Like, we'll bring it back to like, how does that actually like play out in in body form?
Didn't Nietzsche like get analyzed by Jung? Wasn't he a patient of Jung? Didn't Nietzsche go crazy looking at a horse penis? Come on, chat.
I do not know.
Come on, chat. You know this story. Horse penis. Nietzsche went crazy. He went to therapy with Jung. Come on.
Google the Nietzsche went crazy first.
Yeah.
Horse penis.
Oh,
Please.
horse.
Just be
Oh,
careful
whoa.
on the internet chat.
Google responsibly.
But coming back to that, you know, like you do not become enlightened by looking at the light. You become enlightened by moving into the shadow. And I think, you know, that's why I like this conversation. And I really have loved watching chat scroll by as people are talking about the characters that they have reactions to. And I think it's, you know, Morgan, that point you were making about like, yeah, I was kind of judgmental when I was younger. I'm like, yeah, we all were, all of us, even the nice people are judgmental. And I think sometimes when we're having reactions, it's either because we are afraid that we are going to receive that, or we don't want to admit that that's what's like going on subconsciously or under the surface there within us.
All right. So Nietzsche, in January 3rd, 1889, Nietzsche threw his arms around the neck of a horse being beaten, lost consciousness, and turned the madness. And I think he was told by a psychoanalyst that it was because he saw the horse's penis.
Was Freud the psychoanalyst? That's
I was going to say,
Rand.
I wasn't young. Yeah,
I don't have time to find the
he wasn't
truth,
young.
but let's just go with that.
I was too young at that time, and that's when that happened.
Oh, hey, we had a poll 41 minutes ago. Let me end that poll. Whoops.
We got a little distracted in this conversation. Yeah.
No, that's why we're here, though. The conversation trumps all. All right, so yeah, Egwin is the hero. 46% of 15 votes. Yes. All right. Well, let's get off of Nietzsche. We are cruising along. We have 9 minutes left. How long do you think you need for your guided meditation, Miki? Because we should move to our intentions, right? So at the end of every WoT You Feeling, we wrap up the discussion with what we call our intentions, which is like what we want, what we're taking away personally from the conversation. And then we will move to our guided meditation. And so I will go first if no one's ready. Before we close, though, this is, again, another great quote by Jung I'll read. If it has been believed hitherto that the human shadow is the source of all evil, it can now be ascertained on closer investigation that the unconscious man, that is, his shadow, does not consist only of morally reprehensible tendencies, but also displays a good number of qualities such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses. So he definitely believes that we're not just looking at things we don't like about ourselves, it's things that we aspire to, that are parts of ourselves also. We just are not allowing to integrate into our being, which is limiting our individual potential. So my takeaway from this is I definitely encourage everyone to learn as much about Jung as possible. And if you have any time and you're just going about the world, next time you're having an emotional, kind of a strangely strong emotional response to something, maybe someone cut you off in line, maybe someone was, being rambunctious, whatever, something annoying, just try and think about what that might be saying about ourselves. And the more we're able to see ourselves in the world, the more we see ourselves as kind of actors on the same level as every human being, I think we're going to be able to maneuver with more forgiveness and love in our hearts, as opposed to causing like mental walls, which I think judgments ultimately do. So just trying to live a less judgment, a more judgment-free life. So I think Jung would have loved the Wheel of Time, and I'm glad we had this discussion because it's really appropriate. That's my intention.
All right. Well, I think my intention actually kind of dovetails into yours. I think knowing that we are flawed and embracing that shadow self, right? Embracing the darkness makes it easier for us to be aware when we are projecting, because humans judge. We make judgment. We like things in neat, tidy little categories. That's how we get through life. But also maintaining the awareness that, categories don't have to be permanent. So when we look at the archetypes, yeah, people can fall into certain archetypes, but we're complicated. We have room to grow, we have room to change, and kind of approaching the characters that way, and then approaching ourselves and approaching the people around us, knowing that we all have the capacity for growth and change.
Do you think Olbeck has a capacity to grow and change? I'm not sure. Sorry. It's really needed. Jesus Christ.
I think
Hey, that feeds the algorithm.
Thanks, Olbeck. Yeah, you really adding in the conversation. Appreciate it. Hope you have a great life. What were you gonna say, Miki?
Well, I was thinking about how many questions in chat we didn't get to. I saw like how engaged folks were, and I saw a number of questions like, what does it mean if I really like this person or if I don't like this person? And there's so many that we didn't get to, and that we couldn't answer, because what it means is what it means about you, right? Like it's personal, it's individual, and even though there's a collectively held sense of what some of these characters represent, the reason that it is a positive or a negative is because it's reflecting something deep within you. And so I think the intention that I'm taking out of here is like this intention of curiosity, right? Like if I have that question, what does it mean if I like this person, or if I dislike this person, or if I like this character or this piece of artwork or this piece of music, not drive ourselves in circles trying to figure out like the meaning of it. Because here's the thing, right? There's no answer. It's not like there's a right or a wrong answer to any of these questions. I think the power and the beauty is just even being able and willing to ask that question, to slow down enough and say, I do have a reaction right now. What could that mean? Is there something like deeper? Is there some shadow I could step into, some unseen things about myself that I could learn from this experience I'm having right now?
Nice.
So Morgan, now that you've hung out with us for an hour and a half, any intentions or things we've taken away with you?
Oh, well, yeah, I actually knew very little about this. I told Ryan when he mentioned it, I was like, I had heard of Carl Jung, but basically I just knew, that Fraser was a Freudian psychiatrist and that Niles was a Jungian psychiatrist. And so it was interesting to do a little research, because I watched a handful of YouTube videos that were pretty good, and one of them finally kind of made things click, and I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. So I feel like it might be really helpful for character analysis for podcast episodes. So I'm looking forward to just kind of incorporating what I've learned into doing that.
Cool.
Yeah,
excellent.
That is cool.
And before we move to our guided meditation, would you like to tell people about your show?
Oh, yeah. So I host Podcast of the Dragon, which is a topical literary analysis about the Wheel of Time. I'm in the middle of the Shadow Rising, doing episodes for that right now, and working on an episode about the World of Dreams. And so that's what I'm doing. Also, I'll be at JordanCon. If you're coming, you can come and say hi. Might put introverted content creator, so you'll know that I'm not being standoffish. I'm just shy. You can come talk to me.
Part of the ICC.
Yeah,
nice.
And that's me. You can find me at Pod of the Dragon, and there's a link to my YouTube channel that MaTsDaGger just put in the comments. Thanks. So,
Matt's awesome.
Thanks, MaTsDaGger.
All right, I got to give Olbeck. He came in strong at the end. he actually has a concerted opinion, and I agree. If you caught the beginning of the show, you would have heard all the caveats we had about Jung and his theories. But yes, that's fun. We turn him around, maybe.
Yep.
All right. So my favorite part of the show, I get to sit back, relax,
Yeah.
and listen to the dulcet tones of Miki. All right. And we have
102.2, the Wheel of Time FM. All right, folks. Shall we move into a guided meditation then? And maybe it's not serious. Okay, we can be a little bit serious. So, taking a deep breath, allowing yourself to be present in the space wherever you are. Feeling yourself relaxing. If you're seated or laying down, allow yourself to feel supported by the chair, bed, whatever it is that's giving you support in this moment. Then taking a breath in and allowing a gentle exhale. Today we're going to go on a small journey together. I'll be with you along the way, but this journey is yours. So remember, throughout this journey, at any point, if you want to turn back or change it in any way, you can certainly do that. If you're able to, I'd like you to close your eyes and imagine yourself on a pathway. This pathway feels very familiar to you. You notice your sensations feeling comfortable and familiar on the pathway. The sight, the sounds, everything surrounding you right now feels comfortable as you move forward on this path. The pathway brings you to your personal space. This space is yours. I will not describe it because it is yours. You know what it looks like and feels like. There's a sense of familiarity, of comfort, a sense of security in this space because this space is yours. While you're in this space, you have a strong sense of awareness. You are aware of yourself. You are aware of your surroundings, both now and in this space in your mind. As you look around this space in your mind, you become aware that it is a meeting space. Within this space, you recognize parts of yourself. These parts are always inhabiting this space. It is their home and they belong here. Some of these parts you recognize with fondness. These parts of yourself that bring senses of pride or comfort, feelings of a warm hug or motivation to move forward with strength. And some of these parts, you do not feel quite so fond about them. There's some discomfort. These parts are not always kind to you.
they share this space. It is their space too. Throughout our time in this space, remember to touch into that sense of safety and comfort and security. Now I'd like you to bring to mind the part of yourself that you experience as the most caring. This part may feel nurturing or energizing. This part may bring words of comfort to you when you are feeling down and alone. This part might represent people that you've known in your life, caring individuals. I want you to embody this part of yourself. Imagine it as a being there sharing the space with you. On your next breath, I want you to imagine you ask this part of yourself this question. What is your wish for me? Again, your question to it is, what is your wish for me? Imagine this part of yourself that you experience as the most caring, and hear its answer. What does it wish for you? Does it wish safety, love, support, success? Maybe other words that are not coming to my mind right now, but they're in your mind. Now ask this caring part of you, what is it that you try to protect me from? And as you ask this question, bring to mind times that this part of you, this caring part of you, has come in and protected you, has kept you from making a mistake or an error, has helped you succeed in ways that kept you from tripping or falling. And then I would like you to ask this part of yourself, what is it that you push me towards? This caring part of yourself, it moves you towards things, a future perhaps, growth in a particular way. What is it that this caring part of yourself wants for you? And now I would like you to again imagine this caring part of yourself and say to it, thank you for caring for me. And I'd like you to imagine yourself turning around, and you find yourself facing the part of yourself that you experience as the most critical. The part that maybe is attached to feelings of shame, or your stomach tightens as you imagine the things you hear from this part of yourself. And to this part of yourself, I want you to ask it, what is it that you wish of me, this critical part of myself? What is it that you wish for me? How do you want things to change? And then I want you to ask this critical part of yourself, what is it that you try to protect me from? And in that question, I want you to recognize that that is that part's role. It is critical because it is protecting you. And ask it, what are you protecting me from? And then ask that part, what is it that you push me towards? That critical part has a goal for you too. It pushes you towards something, growth, perhaps. Then I'd like you to imagine that critical part of yourself and reach for the deepest part of empathy that you can and say to it, "Thank you for caring for me." Now I would like you to imagine taking a step back, again into that space that is your space, that familiar, comfortable, and secure space, seeing all of the parts of yourself and knowing it as a whole, that every part of yourself plays a role in protecting you and pushing you towards something. Every part of you wants something for you. And in taking that awareness, you step out of that space and onto that pathway, a pathway that is familiar and comfortable. Taking a breath in and a breath out, imagining yourself moving down that pathway towards my voice, feeling yourself again, seated, standing, laying, wherever you are, becoming aware of the surroundings around you, and stepping away from this exercise. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are.